Hello everyone! Today I want to discuss my beginning days as a comic artist. Starting out as a comic artist is always difficult. Because of mistakes I've made along the way, I've had to start over more times than I can count. I kept finding myself on the wrong path. But my first major mistake taught me a lot of lessons I still use today. Hopefully you can learn from my mistakes as I tell you the tale of Maverick Comics and their tantrum-pitching editor. As much as I would like to use real names, all names in this tale have been changed for reasons I'll get into later. My goal was to be a comic colorist, because my coloring skills were my stronger skill, and I was nowhere near ready to write or draw my own stuff. So I did up a portfolio and started trying to get a low-end gig or two. I had already done a few ones for free and was pretty confident about how the process worked. I was full of hopes and dreams, but I still knew I wasn't going to get anything very big. As fate would have it, a writer with some clout that I had admired said that he was seeking a colorist to replace one that had left his project. Let's call this writer Brian. In April of 2012, we got all of the details ironed out. I signed a contract. After settling the details with Brian, I jumped into an email exchange with Jack at Maverick Comics. We agreed on, in his words, $350 and a bunch of books as payment for the entire project. Even though it wasn't much, I had a real contract. I was going to get paid for coloring a comic of someone I admired. This was it. I'd made it, or so I thought. One of the things that remains an upside to this day, that it was a shove that I needed to leave a job that had been frankly destroying me. But that's a different story for a different day. The important part was how major I thought this was. I thought the doors had been blown open for me, and as long as I did good work and kept at it, I would have enough work to sustain me. That first job went okay. There were struggles, as there are with any creative endeavor involving a team, but the job got done, and I thought the worst part of it was that I wasn't going to get paid very much. I got paid the $350, and I knew that publishing took time, so the bunch of books went on the back burner for me. So this project that we had started in April wrapped up in June. Jack immediately wanted me to keep doing work for his company. Dazzled by the promise of consistent work, I said yes. Even if it didn't pay well, it would get better, right? Once I proved I was trustworthy and did good work, my pay would go up. That's how it works in every other industry, isn't it? I thought that would be the case when they offered me another coloring gig that was $500 for 20 pages. As a newbie, that was really good. The problem was, they wanted me to get it done super fast. Even where I'm at now, doing that in less than 2 weeks would be a stretch, and they wanted it in a week. I was smart enough to stand my ground though. Even then, I was hesitant about it all because Jack wanted me to copy another artist's style. After that, when they didn't need a super time crunch, they cut my pay down suddenly to just $10 per page. But I kept taking the work. It was getting the bills paid. I colored several projects for them, despite these weird flags that kept popping up. Alright, so let's dive into a little industry talk here so the rest of the story makes a little more sense. I have a handbook published by the Graphic Artists Guild called Pricing and Ethical Guidelines. It lists industry standard pricing across a broad array of fields. I have the 12th edition, which is from around 2007, so even by the point this story took place, it was a little out of date. But it still gives an insight into what the industry is. It lists comic colors should be paid in a range of $100 to $150 per page, and that's for colors alone. Now that isn't always true, but it isn't uncommon to see $80 a page from a well-established publisher. You can see a breakdown of specific publishers and kind of what they pay per page at creatorresource.com, and that's where you can see kind of that $50 to $80 range. I cut that $80 in half for myself typically because I don't have much behind my name, so about $40 to $50 per page is what I charge. Back when this happened, $25 per page would have been reasonable because I was brand new. So basically, either way you split it, $10 a page was a slap in the face. If you're being offered that on a comic project that you don't absolutely love and you would do for anything, walk away. Now Jack was getting pretty pushy and not very nice, but I chalked it up to me not being familiar with the industry and just needing a thicker skin. By the middle of summer, Jack had added a new job on top of coloring for me: lettering. But the catch was it was only $1 per page. Lesson number 1. Companies like this will try to pull the "be glad you're getting paid at all" tactic. You are worth more than that. If they are offering you something that equates to less than minimum wage, punch them in the teeth and run. But again, I was young and foolish. I accepted that it wasn't my only job, and I got a ton of practice that way. I learned a lot about lettering in those days because I had to figure out how to do it very fast. I also kind of cheated and dropped in fonts instead of using hand lettering. I told them this up front, of course. It was the only way I could get it done in a reasonable amount of time for the rate they were paying. I found some decent looking fonts with cheap licenses and informed them of what I used. It was up to the company to procure the license in order to print and sell the comic, after all. But I doubt they actually followed through on that part. Things were happening at a decent clip. I was getting work done, and they were paying on time. It wasn't the greatest work, but things were going smoothly. At least where the important bits were concerned. Then, in late August of that year, things started to fall apart. A few of the outstanding payments had lapsed 60 days past due when the contract was pay within 30 days. In asking about them and sending new invoices, Jack gave me excuses about outstanding edits and revisions. The cases were typically that I'd never received them or I'd already completed them. But here was another red flag. That hadn't been the case in the months before this happened. He would pay when the work was done and then ask for the edits. But I kept going. Tensions were growing, but I took it as part of the way things worked. I'd learned his ways eventually, right? On October 4th, about 6 months after we'd completed it, that first comic with Brian cropped up again. I was included in an email with the original team because Maverick was publishing seriously incomplete copies of the book, as in missing the vital final pages. And this wasn't the first time they'd done this. A screaming red flag, right? Well, it seemed to be resolved, and I didn't get involved. This would be important later. At that same time, Jack asked me to draw a comic from scratch for a whopping $26 per page. That included penciling, ink, color, and lettering, all myself, for just $26 per page. The page you're watching now took 7.5 hours, not counting the sketch page, which is about another 3 to 4 hours. So you can do the math on that one. And I'm a lot faster than I used to be, so back then it would have been even longer. For this one, we need a specific time breakdown, and I'll include a timeline for you to keep track. Jack asked me to do the project on October 2nd. That was the initial "could you draw to?" conversation and agreement of compensation. I was working on another project at the time, so I could start right away. Late in the evening of October 5th, I finished the work I'd been doing. So on October 6th, I started working on the short comic they wanted me to draw. And drawing a comic from scratch involves a fair bit of planning and sketching that doesn't go into the finished page. Then around noon on October 9th, which I usually start working on comics around noon, Jack asked to see what progress I had made, expecting full pages. I'd had only 3 days to work on it so far. That's it. 3 days. He hadn't given me a deadline, and this jackass is demanding results immediately. On that day, he also sent an email I never responded to. All it said was, "Also," yeah, in fact, it started with the word "also." "Also, it's only 6 pages, so I'm hoping within a week if possible, ... smiley face." A week for 6 pages. Are you insane? And at just $26 per page? That's, I'll do it when I feel like it money. Even back then, I knew a week turnaround time was ridiculous, but I did my best. I did get the line art done in that time, delivering it on the 12th. After all of Jack's pushing, it took another 3 days for him to approve it. He expected me to draw comics in the time it took him just to review them. So I couldn't move on it until the 15th. Then just 2 days later, on the 17th, he started asking if I had the colors done. This bastard didn't even give me the amount of time it took for him to review it for me to color it. Are you noticing a trend here? Thankfully, my style was simpler back then, and I had it done the next day. And the fool that I was, I accepted another project that was basically the same game over again. Lesson number 2. If clients start making hypocritical or unreasonable demands of your time without providing an equal level of compensation, run. You are a content factory to them, not a colleague, or even a human being. They just see you as a source of something they can sell. Just get out, and get out fast. After that, communication started to break down. Jack started to get pissy with me whenever I would give him an invoice for some reason. Late in October, we got into an argument over a miscommunication over a couple of projects where his fellow editor, we'll call Alan, had been involved. For example, most of the comics I was working on were rather low-end comics. The scripts were frankly terrible. The art wasn't great either. It was indicative of what this publisher did. Let's just say it was clear they weren't paying anyone very much. Half the time the scripts barely matched the art. I would ask to make sure, and I was always told to just keep going. That happened on this one project where nothing made sense. Because I was struggling so bad, I ended up talking to the writer myself and discovered I had the wrong copy of the script. So the moment I learned that, I went back to Jack. He got pissy about it and told me to stop lettering after demanding to know why I didn't say anything right away when the art didn't match the script. He said nothing about coloring, so I kept working on that part. A few days later, I asked something about coloring, and he started yelling, "I told you to stop everything!" When just a few emails higher in the conversation, you could clearly see he had only told me to stop lettering. Jack, I learned, is one of those guys who cannot accept responsibility ever. Once things go wrong, it's everyone else's fault, and he throws a tantrum. First it was my fault, then it was Alan's, then it was the writer's, but it was never Jack's. But in the middle of one of these email chains where he kept yelling at me, he suddenly asked me to do another project. Another one where I did everything. Only this time, instead of 3 or 5 pages, it was 30 pages. The first two had a decent amount of character design work done already, and I knew the writer, so it was fairly easy. This one, I had zero contact with the writer. The character designs were severely lacking. All I got was a random scattering of images of the main character and no supporting cast. There was no cohesive style between the images, no guidance, nothing. And the script had almost no descriptive information at all. I tried to get some input to make sure I was going in the right direction, but Jack just wanted all of the inked pages all at once. No sketches, no design work, just inked pages ready to go. I at least got him to agree to looking over half of the pages to make sure I was going in the right direction. At this point, I decided I was beyond done. I had other jobs lined up, and it was time to walk away. It had been 7 months since I started working with him, and that was 7 months more than I wanted. On October 30th, I started work on this comic. On November 3rd, I delivered 15 pages. 15 pages in 5 goddamn days. I gave him the speed he had always demanded, and the line art looked like absolute garbage. I didn't have the time for things like perspective or staying on model. After constantly pushing his full speed ahead mantra, Jack wasn't completely happy with my work. Shocking, I know. Yet he approved the first half and had me do the second. I did those just as fast. Then the most curious thing happened. Communication started to slow down. He asked me to do some edits on a different project, while 2 separate emails about the 30-page project sat unanswered, one of which was the invoice email. I asked about the status in a conversation about lettering edits on a different project, and he finally told me he would have someone else do the coloring to elevate the line work. He didn't even have the guts to tell me until I dragged it out of him. I think Jack suspected I wouldn't chase him down on this. I had a feeling he was accustomed to getting away with that sort of thing. After 4 email reminders, 3 of them unanswered, I finally got a terse payment sent email. And that's lesson number 3. Stay on top of your invoices. The industry is full of con men who bank on artists not wanting to rock the boat. Make sure they pay no matter what. But I still wasn't done with Jack and Maverick. Oh no. There was a bit I was looped in on late in December of that year. Maverick wasn't making good on his promises to keep Brian's project stocked at Amazon. But I never actually saw the resolution on that particular exchange. The big thing came that following April. Yes, a full year after all of this began. Remember that bunch of books I'd been promised? I still hadn't received them. No one had. Not Brian, not the artist. They were offering 15 books at that point. But they could only send out 5 to start. While mine didn't have a set number, the artist chimed in to say he'd been promised 40. That's right, 40 books he'd been promised, and now they were saying, we can send you 5. And that wasn't just 5 per person. That was 5 total that they had to send out. That was the last anyone heard from them for nearly 2 years. Dead silence until January of 2015. Remember, the project started in April of 2012. I was done with this company. I hadn't even bothered to chase down those books with how little I cared about them by that point. But still, no one had received their books. Promises were made about making good, and I left it at that. I wasn't giving Maverick or Jack any more time. Let someone else handle it. Then it came to March of that year, and still nothing had happened for anyone else. It was at that stage that I was discussing things with Brian, and he informed me of a very important fact. Jack held the full rights to his project. Brian couldn't do a damn thing on his own with it. He couldn't reprint it, he couldn't distribute it, it was all up to Jack. That tipped it for me, because once you have someone's copyright, you owe it to them to do as much as you can with it. I was going to get those books out of Jack, out of sheer spite. Brian decided to take the last resort he had. After 3 full years of this, we didn't have any way to get it out of them directly, so Brian and I decided on a new tactic. Brian posted an honest account of his experience with Maverick on his blog. I then shared it on mine and added my own experience that had followed our project. I quoted exact rates they paid me and exact events that had happened. Jack did not like that. He saw this and emailed us almost immediately. This is his exact response to us.
Guys, I'm getting dogpiled on. Colin, I'm sorry you feel this way. I would like out of this, please. I talked with you on the phone, and I'm glad things are good. Colin, how can I make this up to you? I'd prefer we deal with each other face to face if you're upset, as opposed to creating bad will and flames online. I completed our contract, and I'm sorry I paid you so little. Please let me know how we can talk. Brian, I've offered to give you back all of, and I'll walk away without anything. Help me, guys. I'm sorry this didn't work out for anyone, and I'm doing the best I can to get out of this with some sense of professionalism, preventing a hate-on.
This guy wouldn't know professionalism if it slapped him on the ass and called him sweet cheeks. In a later email, he tried to argue that my contract didn't have any books listed as compensation, but thankfully, I'd already learned the value of getting important conversations in writing. This is why I only do business over email. I was able to throw his bunch of books back at him in a professional manner. Then he started offering to pay me cash in lieu of sending me the books. Now, I find this rather odd. Until this point, he'd kept talking about having a warehouse. And at this warehouse, there were over 1,000 copies of this project alone, complete and waiting to be shipped. I knew even then that it was generally preferred to send a product you already had than pay cash outright. So why make this offer? He kept trying to apologize while making really bizarre excuses. Finally, he did send me a whopping 10 books. Whatever happened to the promised 15, I'll never know. But as I promised, I took down the post, Then I told him I would not accept his apology due to the nature of his behavior and refusal to pay people what they were worth. It took him over 2 years to meet his contract obligations to us, so he wasn't really paying us like he said he was. His final email to me was incredibly long, attempting to educate me on the nature of the comics industry. He name-dropped people he'd worked with, blamed Kickstarter for making it impossible for him to keep his business going, then said he could only pay people what the market would bear, basically implying I had no idea what the world was really like. Meanwhile, if you look at basically anyone who's successful, they embrace Kickstarter, they know how to pay people what they're worth, and generally conduct themselves in a professional manner. In the 2 years between ending work with him and this particular exchange, I'd been paid 2 or 3 times what he'd been paying me. I was finding work rather easily and supporting myself just fine. There are people running webcomics that hire colorists and pay more than this guy did. Just individual writers or artists who want someone to color their comic, and they'll pay $20, $30, $40 for someone to color a comic, and he's only paying $10. The final lesson is this. Trust your gut. Even if you're new, trust what your gut says. Find resources, talk to people, but above all else, know what you're worth and don't make compromises in exchange for experience or worse, exposure. You make your own experience. There are tons of resources out there for you to practice in your own time. Value yourself, because if you can find one opportunity, you'll definitely find more. Selling yourself short to accept the first one that comes along only holds you back from a better one that could be right behind it. Listen to your gut, not your anxiety. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one. And don't forget to like, share, and even better, subscribe. It helps more than you know.